Lucille arrived at the law firm wearing the nicest outfit she had bought 6 years ago at a thrift store and shoes that pinched her calluses. As soon as she entered, she was taken to a private room. The lawyer, a gray-haired and elegant man, stood up respectfully. "Please have a seat, Mrs. Carter." She obeyed. The man opened a leather folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Mr. William Matthews left this will 6 months ago. It was handwritten, witnessed, and notarized. I will read only the part that concerns you." Lucille felt her heart pound in her ribs. He unfolded the paper, adjusted his glasses, and said, "The only person who stood by my side in my final years was Lucille Carter. She was more than a caregiver. She was a friend, a confidant, a light in the midst of darkness. For that reason, I leave to her the entirety of my assets, accounts, properties, and investments, currently valued at $95 million. Silence. Time stopped. Lucille thought she must have misheard. 95 million? She looked at the lawyer, then at her own hands. Hands that changed adult diapers. Hands that made soup. Hands that cleaned up vomit. Hands of a poor woman. Now the heir to nearly $100 million. Lucille was 50 years old, a black woman whose face carried the delicate map of time, soft wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, lines etched by both worry and laughter. Life had never been gentle with her. A widow, she had buried her husband many years before, and with his passing came not only grief but also poverty that wrapped itself around her like a heavy coat she could never take off. Her days were long, her body often tired, but there was something unshakable inside her, a heart that still believed in tenderness and kindness, in the sacredness of caring for another human being. She worked as a caregiver in the home of Mr. Richard, an elderly man of immense wealth but empty solitude. His house stood like a monument of stone and silence, filled with polished furniture and golden frames, but no warmth of family, no echo of children's laughter. Lucille often thought it was a beautiful prison, gilded but hollow. She entered that house each morning not as a guest, but as a presence who tried to bring life back into its quiet halls. Her hands were never idle, folding blankets, preparing meals, lifting Mr. Richard gently from his chair to his bed, but beyond the motions of duty, there was always an extra layer of care. When he drifted into sleep, she smoothed his blanket with a patience that spoke louder than words. When he mumbled fragments of stories, names from long ago, pieces of memories that slipped through his frail mind like sand, she leaned in, listening, as though those broken sentences were treasures. "Did I ever tell you about my brother?" he would ask, his voice thin, almost trembling. Lucille would smile softly. "Tell me again," she whispered, even if she had heard it before. Sometimes his cloudy eyes would widen, surprised that anyone cared enough to listen. He was a man who had known power, influence, and the attention of society. But now all of that had dissolved, and what remained was only his fragility. In Lucille's presence, he was no longer invisible. She treated him not as a burden to be carried, but as a soul who still mattered, who still deserved dignity. Other caregivers in the past had rushed through the work, ticking boxes, fulfilling contracts. Lucille was different. She believed that even in the final chapters of life, people needed gentleness. She knew pain herself. Her own nights were sometimes filled with silence, so loud it pressed against her chest, but she chose not to pass that heaviness forward. Instead, she gave what she wished she could always receive, comfort. Even when her hands ached from arthritis, she forced a smile, humming softly as she massaged ointment into her palms before returning to work. Even when the night stretched endlessly and she fought against fatigue that made her knees tremble, she stayed, keeping vigil by Mr. Richard's bedside. When he stirred, restless, whispering words she could barely understand, she laid a calming hand on his shoulder. There, she would say gently. "You're not alone." In truth, Lucille herself often felt desperately alone. The world had not given her much, her husband gone too soon, her son Elliot grown and carving out his own life, her home a modest apartment that carried the smell of damp wood. But within her, a flame still burned, the belief that love was not measured in wealth or possessions. Love was her nature. It was who she was, even when no one was watching. Mr. Richards sometimes looked at her with a gaze that seemed to ask silently, "Why do you care? Why do you stay?" And though she never voiced it, her answer was always the same: because life is sacred, and no one deserves to fade away without being seen. Lucille never expected anything from him in return. In fact, she often wondered if he even remembered her name when his memory wandered. Yet, in those rare lucid moments, when he squeezed her hand weakly and whispered, "Thank you," something in her heart lifted, as though the weight she carried became a little lighter. Her routine was simple, almost invisible to the world: waking before dawn, walking to the mansion in shoes worn thin at the soles, carrying with her not just food or medicine, but an invisible reservoir of patience. She was not rich in money, but in compassion she was abundant, and that was enough for her. At least, that's what she thought. For Lucille could never have imagined that her quiet dedication, her countless unnoticed acts of kindness, and her silent endurance of the nights would change her life in ways she had never dared to dream. She did not know that within the stillness of those walls, in the gaze of a man who had once been surrounded by wealth but now only knew her as comfort, a decision was being shaped, one that would not only alter the course of her own journey, but also reveal to the world the true measure of her worth. In those quiet moments, as she smoothed his blanket one last time each evening and whispered, "Good night, Mr. Richard," Lucille believed she was only closing another ordinary day. What she could not yet see was that destiny had already begun to write a very different chapter for her, a chapter where the woman who thought she had nothing would discover she had been carrying a treasure all along, a love so unwavering that even the shadows of loneliness could not extinguish it. The day Mr. Richard passed away, silence filled the mansion in a way Lucille had never experienced before. It was not the usual quiet of an old man dozing in his chair, nor the hushed stillness of midnight when even the clocks seemed to rest. This silence was heavier, final, and absolute. Lucille sat beside his bed long after the nurses confirmed what her heart already knew. She held his frail hand, still warm but quickly cooling, and whispered a prayer through trembling lips. Her tears slid down quietly, not for the grandeur of the house she would be leaving behind, but for the fragile soul she had accompanied to his final breath. In that moment, all the memories of his mumblings, his fleeting smiles, his surprising moments of lucidity flooded her chest. She realized she had not only been his caregiver, she had been his only witness at the end of a long life. That night, walking back home, the world outside seemed strangely indifferent. Cars still honked, neighbors still carried grocery bags, children still played in the street. Yet inside Lucille, there was a void. She had lost someone, not family, not a friend in the ordinary sense, but a presence she had poured her care into every single day. Days passed in a blur. She tidied up her small apartment, folded her modest clothes, and tried to return to her routine, but everything felt off. There was no early walk to the mansion, no preparing Mr. Richard's breakfast, no waiting by his bedside when he drifted into restless sleep. For the first time in years, Lucille felt unanchored. She would sit in her kitchen, her cup of coffee growing cold, staring at the steam as if it might answer the question she didn't dare to ask. What now? Then came the letter. An official envelope, stiff and imposing, slid beneath her apartment door one afternoon. Her hands trembled as she opened it, fearing it might be a formality about the end of her employment. Instead, it was an invitation to meet at a lawyer's office downtown. The words were formal, distant, but they carried an undertone that made her uneasy. Matters regarding the estate of Mr. Richard. On the appointed day, Lucille dressed in her best outfit, a simple skirt and blouse she had worn to church many times before. She clutched her old purse close to her chest, the leather worn thin, and took the bus into the city. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the tall building, marble floors gleaming under her shoes that squeaked with nervousness. The lawyer's office was lined with shelves of books, thick volumes with golden titles she could not quite read from where she sat. The lawyer, a man with silver glasses and a perfectly ironed suit, greeted her with polite detachment. He gestured for her to sit across from him. Mrs. Lucille, he began, his voice professional, steady. Thank you for coming. I know this must be a difficult time. Lucille nodded, her fingers tightening on her purse. Ah, I cared for him, she whispered, her voice already cracking. The lawyer looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring the weight of what he was about to say. Then he opened a folder, adjusted his glasses, and spoke the words that would change Lucille's life forever. Mr. Richard left everything to you. Lucille blinked, her breath caught in her throat. I'm sorry. What do you mean? His entire estate, the lawyer clarified. The house, the assets, the bank accounts. The total sum amounts to $95 million. The words fell like thunder. 95 million. It sounded like something from a dream, a number so impossible that it didn't belong to her world of small kitchens, unpaid bills, and patched clothes. That can't be, she whispered, shaking her head. I was just his caregiver. The lawyer pushed the papers toward her, pages stamped and signed with legal authority. It is all here, Mrs. Lucille. He made this decision himself. He wrote that you were the only person who gave him dignity when the world had forgotten him. Her hands shook violently as she touched the papers, as though they might burn her skin. Gratitude and fear twisted together in her chest. Gratitude because she had been seen. Fear because such wealth did not belong in her life, not in the life of a woman who counted coins to buy bread. Lucille stumbled out of the office hours later, the city lights blurring through her tears. She clutched her purse tighter, though inside it was only the same worn handkerchief and small notebook. The papers remained with the lawyer for now, but the knowledge of what they represented weighed heavier than any object she could carry. On the bus ride home, she sat silently, staring out the window. Around her, people chatted, laughed, scrolled through their phones. Lucille's world, however, had tilted into something unfamiliar. She felt both chosen and cursed. What would she do with so much money? How could she explain it to her son? Would people look at her differently, treat her differently, love her differently, or not at all? When she reached her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, her hands still trembling. She whispered into the empty room, Lord, what am I supposed to do with this? Her voice cracked, and for a long time she wept. By morning, she had made one decision. She would tell no one, not yet. This secret was too fragile, too dangerous. She needed time to understand it herself. For now, she would carry it inside her heart, hidden from the world. But she also knew something else. This inheritance, this staggering gift, would not only test her life, it would test the hearts of those closest to her. And in that test, she would learn the truth about love, loyalty, and the measure of a soul. The kitchen smelled of onions slowly caramelizing in butter, the kind of smell that clung to Lucille's clothes and made the small apartment feel like home. She stirred the pot with deliberate care, her mind elsewhere. The papers, the lawyer's voice, the impossible number, $95 million, echoed in her head every waking moment. It was as though she was carrying a thunderstorm inside her chest, but on the outside, she tried to remain calm, steady, ordinary. That evening, she had decided, finally, that she would tell Elliot. Her son deserved to know. She had rehearsed it in her mind again and again, how she would sit him down, how she would explain that the old man had left her everything, how she didn't even understand why. She practiced the words silently, whispering them to herself as she chopped vegetables. Still, her heart raced with fear. Elliot was her pride and her joy, tall and broad-shouldered now, but forever the little boy she once held against her chest when storms rattled their thin apartment windows. He had grown into a young man with bright eyes, eyes that seemed to carry light wherever he went. At 26, he was full of dreams and energy, always chasing something beyond the horizon. Lucille admired his determination, but she also worried that the world, so often cruel, might break him. That night, the door opened with a rush of cool air, and Elliot stepped inside. His smile lit up the room instantly. "Mom," he called, dropping his bag onto the floor with careless ease. Lucille dried her hands on a towel, her heart softening the moment she saw him. "You're late," she said, though her voice was more tender than scolding. "I had something important," he replied, his eyes sparkling as he crossed the room toward her. He took her hands in his excitement radiating like sunlight. "Actually, I need to tell you something." Lucille's heart skipped. For a moment, she thought, does he already know? Did someone tell him? Her secret rose up, pressing against her throat. But Elliot's smile widened, and he said the words she wasn't expecting. "Alyssum and I, we're getting married." Time seemed to stop. The spoon slipped from Lucille's fingers, clattering against the counter. She looked at him, her mouth opening, but no words coming out. "Married?" she finally whispered, her voice caught between disbelief and fragile joy. "Yes," Elliot said, his grin boyish, almost shy. "She's the love of my life, Mom. I've never been more certain of anything." His eyes glowed with conviction. "She makes me happy." Lucille forced her lips into a smile, though inside her chest the storm grew heavier. She had come to the evening ready to reveal her own secret, but now his news overshadowed everything. She could not burden his happiness with her impossible truth. "Married so soon?" she asked softly, trying to sound casual, though her voice wavered. Elliot laughed lightly, shrugging. "Life is short, Mom. You taught me that. Why wait to be with the person I love?" Lucille looked into his eager eyes and saw the boy who once brought her wildflowers picked from a sidewalk crack, the boy who believed love could conquer anything. How could she take that moment from him? How could she tell him that she had suddenly become a woman who carried millions in her shadowed pocket? He would look at her differently. Everyone would. So she nodded, swallowing her fear. "If she makes you happy," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled, "then that's what matters." Elliot squeezed her hands, joy overflowing from him. "Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd understand." He hugged her tightly, lifting her off the ground in a burst of affection that made her laugh despite her unease. Later, as they sat at the small table eating dinner, Elliot spoke of Alyssa's laughter, her kindness, her dreams of building a family. His words poured out like a river, unstoppable. Lucille listened, nodding, her smile gentle, her eyes occasionally drifting to the window where the night pressed close. She barely touched her food. When he left, full of plans and promises, Lucille stood at the door, watching him disappear down the hallway. Her body sagged as soon as she was alone, the weight of her unspoken secret pressing harder than ever. She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes wet. "I couldn't do it," she whispered into the silence. "Not tonight." She returned to the kitchen, where the leftover food sat untouched, and sank into a chair. She folded her hands, staring at them as though they held the answers. Her secret clawed at her chest, demanding release, but her heart told her to wait. She needed to know, she had to know, how the world, how even her own son, would treat her if they still believed she was poor. For years, she had lived invisible among the wealthy, judged by her simple dresses and calloused hands. Now she carried wealth beyond imagination, yet still wore the same shoes with their thinning soles. She wondered, if the truth came out, would Elliot's fiancé's family look at her differently? Would they suddenly pretend to embrace her, not because of love, but because of money? The fear of false affection terrified her more than the loneliness of poverty ever had. That night, Lucille knelt beside her bed, the springs groaning under her weight as she prayed. "Lord, guide me," she whispered, her tears soaking the blanket. "I don't want this money to destroy the little I have. I want to know who truly loves me, for me, not for what I have." Her prayer echoed in the room, unanswered but not unheard. And so, in that moment, Lucille made her choice. She would remain silent. She would keep the inheritance locked away in her heart. She would watch, she would wait, and she would see who would honor her in her poverty before ever knowing her wealth. It was a decision that would test not just her own courage, but the foundation of every relationship in her life. For now, however, she smoothed the blanket on her bed, as she once had for Mr. Richard, and whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow will tell." The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of preparations, each one pulling Lucille further into a world that was not her own. She had lived her whole life in modest apartments, where the walls sometimes leaked when it rained and the floorboards creaked with every step. Now she found herself traveling to Alisson's family estate in the countryside, a mansion so vast it looked less like a home and more like a kingdom carved from stone and pride. The journey itself felt like a passage into another universe. As the car turned onto the long gravel driveway, Lucille pressed her hands against her knees, trying to still their trembling. Trees lined both sides, tall and ancient, as though bowing to the grandeur of what lay ahead. At the end of the path, the mansion loomed, 3 stories of carved stone, windows glinting like mirrors, balconies adorned with ivy that seemed almost too perfect to be real. It was a palace of wealth, the kind Lucille had only seen in magazines left behind in waiting rooms. When she stepped out, her worn shoes met the pristine white gravel, and for the first time, she felt small in a way she had not since childhood. The building itself seemed to stare down at her, reminding her she did not belong. Her simple suitcase, packed with just 2 dresses, one for the wedding and one for the days leading up to it, felt like a poor offering in a place where even the air smelled expensive. Inside, the mansion was even more overwhelming. The marble floors reflected the chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls of crystal. Golden frames held portraits of ancestors with stern eyes and powdered wigs, people who had likely never known the weight of poverty or the fear of unpaid bills. Servants in crisp uniforms moved quickly, arranging flowers, carrying trays of champagne, adjusting linens that already looked flawless. Lucille tried to step lightly, but every sound of her footsteps echoed. She clutched her purse to her chest, hoping it would make her feel less exposed. Guests moved about, laughing, their voices rising like music she couldn't join. Their clothes shimmered with fabrics she had never dared to touch, silks and satins that whispered of lives lived far from struggle. Each time she passed, their eyes flicked toward her, some curious, others dismissive. Their conversations never paused for her. She was a shadow slipping between them, invisible except when noticed as out of place. Then came the moment she would never forget. Alisson's mother approached her. The woman was tall, elegant, every hair in place, her dress tailored as if woven onto her skin. Her smile was sharp and cold, the kind that seemed to slice rather than welcome. "You must be Elliot's mother," she said, her voice flat, her eyes scanning Lucille from head to toe. Lucille felt her throat tighten. She lowered her gaze, instinctively smoothing her simple dress as though trying to erase its plainness. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm Lucille." The woman tilted her head, smile never softening. "Well, we're so pleased you could come." But the pause in her sentence betrayed her true meaning. She was not pleased. She was tolerating. With that, she drifted away, leaving Lucille rooted in place, her cheeks burning. The rest of the day was no easier. When she tried to join a group of women talking about the wedding decorations, their laughter dimmed until she excused herself. When she sat in a corner of the grand hall, no one sat beside her. It was as if an invisible wall separated her from everyone else, a wall built not from bricks, but from money, status, and judgment. Lucille found herself wandering into quieter parts of the house just to breathe. She stood by tall windows, watching the garden stretch endlessly under the fading light, and whispered to herself, "Stay strong. You're here for Elliot, not for them." Yet her heart whispered another truth, one she could not deny. Money could build walls of marble, but it could not build kindness. This mansion, for all its grandeur, felt colder than her small apartment back home, where the stove sometimes smoked and the curtains were patched, but love always lingered. At dinner that evening, Lucille sat at a long table covered in shining silverware she did not know how to use. The courses came one after another, soups poured into porcelain bowls, meats carved with precision, desserts decorated like art. She ate quietly, carefully, aware of eyes glancing toward her. Each bite felt heavy, not with food, but with the weight of being watched, measured, judged. Her son sat beside Alyssum, his hand gently brushing hers, his eyes glowing with the innocence of love. He looked happy. That was all Lucille wanted, to see him happy. So she smiled, even when her own heart ached. Later, as the guests continued with their laughter and dancing, Lucille slipped away to her room. It was a guest room luxurious beyond anything she had ever slept in, with silk sheets and a chandelier even above the bed. Yet, as she sat on the edge of the mattress, her body sank under the invisible weight of the day. She covered her face with her hands, silent tears slipping between her fingers. In that vast, opulent house, surrounded by people, Lucille had never felt more alone. But she also carried a secret no one there could have imagined. $95 million rested like a hidden fire in her chest, a fire she had chosen not to reveal. As much as she ached under the sting of humiliation and dismissal, she told herself again, better they see me as poor. Better they show me their true hearts before they ever see the truth about mine. She lay down, listening to the faint music drifting from the hall below, and whispered into the darkness, I am more than they think. And one day, they will see. Lucille sat in the quiet of her modest room, the ticking of the clock echoing like distant footsteps across her heart. For weeks, she had carried inside her the crushing weight of silence, the truth locked away in her chest like a fragile bird that fluttered desperately for release. Elliot had grown restless, torn between the duty of marrying Alyssum and the inexplicable pull he felt toward Lucille. His gaze betrayed him every time their eyes met, lingering too long, too heavy, filled with unspoken questions. But Lucille had sworn to protect him from a truth that could ruin him. She was not simply his confidant, nor just the woman who had quietly mended the torn edges of his soul after his fiancé's betrayal. She was more. She was the hidden chapter of his past, the living reminder of a story Elliot had never been allowed to know fully. And as the days grew heavier, the truth threatened to burst forth. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in tender shades of violet and gold, Elliot appeared at Lucille's door. He did not knock. He stood there, his face pale, his breath unsteady, as though he had walked miles carrying invisible chains. Lucille, he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. I cannot bear this anymore. I feel there is something you're not telling me. Something that explains why I feel connected to you in a way that frightens me. Lucille lowered her gaze, her hands trembling around the hem of her faded dress. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, yet now, with his presence so raw before her, words slipped away. You don't understand, Elliot, she said softly, her voice strained with both tenderness and fear. There are truths that hurt more than lies, and I don't want to wound you. His steps faltered as he entered the room. I would rather face the pain of truth than drown in this fog of half-answers. Please, don't leave me in the dark. Lucille felt her knees weaken. She sat, clutching her hands together as if in prayer, her heart pounding with the memory of years gone by. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. Elliot, she whispered, her voice breaking. You've been searching for love, for belonging, for someone who wouldn't leave you. But all this time, what you've been longing for was closer than you ever knew. I never told you, because I feared what it would do to you, to your life, to your place in this family. Elliot leaned closer, confusion and dread dancing in his eyes. Tell me, Lucille. Whatever it is, I swear I can bear it. Lucille's chest rose and fell with a heavy sigh, and finally, she released the bird from its cage. Elliot, I am your mother. The words fell into the air with the weight of a thunderclap. Elliot froze, his lips parting in disbelief. For a long moment, silence filled the room, so dense it was almost unbearable. My mother. His voice was a broken whisper, drenched in disbelief. He shook his head violently, as if to drive the thought away. No, that's impossible. My mother died. I was told she died when I was a child. Lucille wept openly now, tears falling like rain. That's the story they made you believe. The story they forced me to live with. I was young, alone, powerless. They took you from me, and gave you another life, a life of privilege, of comfort, while I was left with nothing but memories and a heart that ached for you every single day." Elliot's chest heaved, his hands clawing at his temples as if his mind could not hold the weight of this revelation. Why would they do this? Why would they lie to me? Lucille reached out, her hands trembling, daring to touch his arm. "Because I was poor, Elliot. Because they believed I had nothing to offer you. They thought love could be replaced with wealth, that a mother's embrace was less valuable than a luxurious cradle. I was silenced, erased, but my love for you never died. It lived in every sacrifice, every tear, every prayer I whispered in the stillness of night." Elliot pulled back, pacing the room as though the walls closed in on him. He felt betrayed, torn between fury and heartbreak. "All these years," he whispered, his voice shaking, "all these years I've been searching for a place where I belonged. And it was with you all along?" Lucille's sobs grew softer, her voice pleading. "Yes, my son. You've always belonged in my heart. But I never wanted to ruin your life by telling you. I thought perhaps it was better if you never knew. But seeing you torn apart by lies, by loneliness, I couldn't keep it from you anymore." Elliot's legs gave way, and he sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, Lucille feared he would reject her, that her confession would shatter whatever fragile bond they had built. But then, through muffled sobs, his words emerged. "All this time, I thought I was unloved, unwanted. And yet you were loving me in silence." Lucille knelt before him, her hands resting gently over his trembling ones. "Always, Elliot, every day of my life. You were never unloved. You were my reason for surviving the hardest nights, my strength when I wanted to give up. You are my sun, my heart." Slowly, Elliot lifted his tear-streaked face, and in his eyes, Lucille saw the boy he once had been, the child she had held, the infant she had lost. And then, with a sob that tore through his chest, he threw his arms around her. "Mother," he cried, clinging to her as if to make up for the years stolen from them. "I've finally found you." In that embrace, pain and love mingled like rivers converging. It was not an easy reconciliation. Wound of the past remained, questions still hung heavy in the air, and the road ahead promised both healing and struggle. But for the first time, Elliot felt a piece of himself return, a missing puzzle piece that finally made sense of the emptiness inside him. Lucille held him tightly, whispering words of comfort as her tears fell into his hair. "We cannot change the past, my son, but we can choose our tomorrow. And tomorrow we will walk it together." The night stretched around them, but for Elliot and Lucille, it was no longer filled with despair. It was filled with the fragile but undeniable hope of a love reclaimed, a truth no longer hidden in shadows. The morning after the revelation, the air in the mansion felt heavier, as though the very walls had absorbed the weight of the truth Lucille and Elliot had finally unveiled. Sunlight spilled timidly through the tall windows, yet even its warmth could not quiet the storm that lingered in Elliot's heart. He paced the corridors, his thoughts unraveling in chaotic threads, grief for the years stolen from him, anger at the lies fed to him, and a fragile joy that he had found something, someone he thought lost forever. Lucille, meanwhile, sat quietly in the small garden behind the house, her floral dress swaying gently with a morning breeze. Her hands rested on her lap, clasped tightly, as if holding herself together. She had expected rejection, perhaps even hatred, yet Elliot's embrace the night before had given her a flicker of hope she hadn't dared to dream of. But hope, she knew, was delicate. It needed patience, care, and time to grow. Elliot found her there, surrounded by the fragrance of roses and jasmine, her figure bathed in the golden glow of dawn. For a moment, he simply stood and watched her, noticing how the lines of sorrow etched in her face seemed softened by the light. She was no longer just the quiet woman who had been at his side. She was his mother. That word still felt strange on his tongue, foreign and familiar all at once. "Lucille," he began, his voice hesitant. Then, after a pause, he corrected himself, the word trembling as it left his lips. "Mother." Lucille turned sharply, her eyes glistening with tears at the sound. It was the first time he had called her that, and though it was heavy with uncertainty, it filled her with warmth she hadn't felt in decades. "Yes, my son," she answered softly. Elliot sat beside her, his hands restless in his lap. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice low, almost ashamed. "All my life, I believed you were gone. I learned to live with that emptiness. And now you're here, telling me you've always loved me, always watched from the shadows. It's overwhelming. Part of me wants to cling to you. Another part feels betrayed that I was kept in the dark." Lucille's heart ached as she listened. She reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "You have every right to feel this way. Anger, confusion, grief, they are all wounds of the truth. But please know I was never silent by choice. I was silenced. They told me you would be better without me. They stripped me of my voice, of my right to call you my son. All I had left was love, and love cannot be stolen." Elliot's eyes burned with tears, and he gripped her hand tightly. "I keep remembering moments of my childhood, the loneliness, the sense that something was missing. I used to lie awake, wondering why love always felt like it slipped through my fingers. And now I see it wasn't missing. It was just hidden from me. Hidden in you." A sob escaped Lucille, and she leaned into him, her forehead against his shoulder. "If I could have fought harder, I would have. But I was young, powerless, alone. All I could do was pray that one day the truth would find its way back to you. And now here we are, my son. Broken, but together." They stayed like that, holding on to one another, letting the silence say what words could not. Slowly, Elliot's breathing steadied, and he lifted his mother's face with gentle hands. "We can't change the past," he said firmly, though his voice trembled. "But we can choose what comes next. I don't want to lose another day with you." Lucille smiled through her tears, her eyes glowing with a fragile but radiant hope. "Nor do I. From now on, we walk forward together." The days that followed were filled with awkward tenderness. Elliot and Lucille began to weave new routines, morning walks in the garden, conversations over simple meals, and long evenings where they shared fragments of their lives. Elliot spoke of his career, his ambitions, his heartbreaks. Lucille, in turn, revealed the struggles of her past, the sleepless nights she spent in loneliness, the work that wore her body thin, the prayers whispered for a son she could not hold. Each story was a thread, and together they began to sew a tapestry of belonging. Yet, not everyone welcomed this new bond. Alyssum, who had once mocked Lucille and schemed her way into Elliot's life, sneered at their closeness. Rumors spread in the corridors of high society, whispers of scandal. How could Elliot, heir to fortune and influence, embrace a woman of such humble origins as his mother? But Elliot no longer cared. For the first time in his life, he felt anchored, his heart grounded in truth, not appearances. One evening, after dinner, Elliot looked across the table at Lucille, who smiled softly as she sipped her tea. "I've been thinking," he said. "All these years, I've lived in luxury, yet I felt poor in spirit. You, on the other hand, had nothing but gave everything. I want to honor you, Mother. Not in secret, not in whispers, but openly. The world will know who you are to me." Lucille's eyes widened, fear flickering in them. "Elliot, people can be cruel. They will judge. They will try to humiliate you because of me. Let them," Elliot replied, his voice steady with conviction. "For once, I will not let the world dictate my choices. You gave me life, you gave me love, even when it cost you everything. Now it's my turn to give back, to stand by you." Lucille's tears spilled over, but this time they were not only of sorrow. They were tears of pride, of joy, of a mother finally being seen for who she truly was. She reached across the table, taking his hand. "You are my greatest gift, Elliot. Whatever comes, we face it together." In that moment, the fracture between past and present began to heal. The mansion no longer felt like a place of lies and shadows, but a home slowly filling with laughter, truth, and love. For the first time in decades, Lucille allowed herself to believe in a future not marked by loss, but by renewal. And for Elliot, the emptiness that had haunted him since childhood began to fade, replaced by the steady presence of the mother he had unknowingly longed for all his life. The rebuilding had begun. And though it would take time, patience, and resilience, both knew this truth. Love, though delayed, had finally found its way home. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the tall stained glass windows of the church. The colors splintered across the marble floors, painting the air in ruby reds, sapphire blues, and golden ambers. Everything about the day whispered perfection. The delicate scent of lilies, the polished pews, the choir rehearsing hymns with voices that seemed to touch heaven itself. And yet, for Lucille, every breath felt heavy, every step uncertain, as though the air itself pressed upon her chest. Her dress, modest but neatly pressed, felt like armor and fragility all at once. She smoothed the fabric nervously, her hands trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. Today she would honor her son, support him in the life he had chosen, but even in the midst of celebration, a storm lingered in the corners of her heart. She had glimpsed Alyson's family's true colors during the prior days: cold smiles, sharp eyes, subtle jabs that left invisible bruises. And now, in this sacred space, Lucille could feel the same judgment pressing down, heavier than any she had known. Elliot was radiant. Dressed in tailored black, his posture straight, his eyes bright, he walked with the confidence of a man who believed he could face anything. He kissed Lucille gently on the cheek, offering a smile that tried to reassure her. But Lucille knew him too well, his clenched fists, the slight tremor of his jaw. He was aware of the tension, of the judgment lurking behind the polished smiles. Alyson entered the aisle like a vision of porcelain beauty, her gown cascading like liquid moonlight. Guests held their breath as she moved forward, each step measured, rehearsed, flawless. Lucille's heart tightened as she watched, a perfect picture of happiness, yet painted over the cracks of arrogance and entitlement. When the priest began the ceremony, the air felt almost sacred, almost suspended in time. "Do you, Elliot, take Alyson to be your wife, to love and honor her for all your days?" A hush fell. The guests leaned forward, eager for the expected answer. But Elliot's gaze did not find Alyson. Instead, it swept over the faces of those who had judged, dismissed, and humiliated Lucille. The wealthy family who had sneered at her, whispered about her modest dress, and overlooked the woman who had raised their son's heart with unwavering love. The question repeated, slower this time, almost as if the priest sensed the tension crackling through the air. "Do you, Elliot?" Elliot's hands clenched, his knuckles white as marble. The room seemed to hold its breath, every whisper and shuffle of fabric amplified. Then, in a voice that trembled but rang with conviction, he said, "No." Shock rippled through the guests like a sudden storm. Gasps and whispers erupted, the orderly procession of expectations collapsing in a moment of raw truth. Lucille felt her chest tighten, a mixture of fear and relief washing over her. She had feared this confrontation, yet part of her, a quiet, steadfast part, knew this was inevitable. Elliot continued, his voice rising with a strength she had not seen before, each word a hammer striking against centuries of privilege. "I will not marry into a family that humiliates the woman who gave me everything. My mother deserves honor, not shame. She has sacrificed her entire life for me, and I cannot allow anyone to diminish her worth for appearances, for wealth, or for status." Alyson's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with hurt. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The guests, frozen, turned their gaze to Lucille, who sat rooted in her modest dress, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears threatening to spill. She looked small against the grandeur of the hall, yet in that moment, she radiated a dignity that no opulence could ever purchase. Elliot's words echoed like thunder, shaking the very foundations of their world. "I choose love, truth, and respect. I choose my mother, the woman who gave me life and taught me its true value, over appearances, over money, over empty promises." Lucille could hardly breathe. She wanted to stand, to run to him, to hold him, and tell him how proud she was. And when he turned and left the altar, running past shocked faces and whispered judgments. She felt a surge of fear for him, but also a surge of hope. Hope that he would no longer be trapped by the world's shallow expectations, that he would follow his heart unafraid. The ceremony dissolved into chaos. Guests murmured angrily, some scowling, others whispering rumors that would ripple through society like wildfire. But Lucille's focus was entirely on her son, now racing down the aisle, and the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot and cleansing, as she rose and followed quietly behind him. Her heart was pounding, not from shame, not from fear, but from the raw, uncontainable love for the man who had once been a boy in her arms. In his defiance, she saw courage. In his love, she saw the reflection of every sacrifice she had ever made. Outside the church, the sky stretched wide and blue, the world unchanged yet somehow transformed. Elliot had chosen integrity over expectation, love over pretense, and Lucille realized that in that choice lay the possibility of new beginnings. "Mom!" Elliot's voice broke the air as he skidded to a halt, turning to embrace her. She ran into his arms, holding him tightly, feeling the weight of years lift like morning mist. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply clung to one another, hearts beating in time, a bridge across decades of absence, pain, and longing. Lucille whispered against his hair, "It's okay, my son. We'll face whatever comes next together." And in that sacred, chaotic, broken ceremony, they both understood wealth, status, and pretense were nothing compared to the bond they had reclaimed. The world might judge, mock, or scorn them, but the love between a mother and her son had proven stronger than any marble walls, colder than any polished gaze. They walked away from the church, side by side, hearts aligned, ready to rebuild a life defined not by wealth, but by truth, dignity, and love. The path outside the church stretched in silence, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon. Leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, carrying with them the faint scent of freshly cut grass and the distant warmth of sunlight. Elliot ran, heart pounding in his chest, past the marble steps and polished doors of a world that had demanded so much and offered so little. His gaze was fixed on the small figure ahead, a woman whose presence had defined his life long before he understood why. Lucille. She walked slowly, a small suitcase in hand, the hem of her modest dress brushing the ground. Tears streaked her face, catching the golden light like fragments of glass. Her steps faltered with exhaustion, heart heavy from humiliation, fear, and the years of silence that had brought her to this moment. She had tried to remain invisible all her life, yet here she was, exposed, vulnerable, and ready to confront the truth she had hidden for decades. "Mom!" Elliot's voice rang out, breaking the fragile quiet. Lucille turned sharply, her eyes wide and glistening, lips trembling as if she had forgotten how to speak. He was there in an instant, grabbing her shoulders gently but firmly, as if anchoring her to the present. "I'm sorry, Elliot," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "I didn't want to ruin your day. I thought maybe it was better if I stayed silent, kept the truth buried." Elliot shook his head, his fingers brushing tears from her cheeks. "You are my world, Mom. Nothing else matters. I don't care what anyone says, what anyone thinks. I don't need wealth, titles, or approval. I need you. And I need the truth." Lucille's chest heaved as she searched his eyes, seeing in them the unwavering love she had dreamed of for decades. She swallowed hard, the words catching in her throat like a knot of fear and hope intertwined. "Elliot, there is something I have kept from you, something I feared would change everything between us." He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the lines of her cheek with tender reverence. "I am ready. I want to know everything." Lucille took a deep, shuddering breath, closing her eyes for a brief moment before speaking. "When the old man I cared for passed, he left something to me. Not because I asked, not because I expected it, but because he saw the love I gave, the devotion I offered. $95 million, Elliot. $95 million that were never yours or anyone else's until now." Elliot's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with awe. He stumbled back slightly, trying to absorb the enormity of what she had just revealed. 9.95 million. His voice was barely a whisper, trembling between incredulity and wonder. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I was afraid, she admitted, tears spilling freely now. Afraid of how the world would see us. Afraid that people would love me for the money, not for who I am. I wanted you to see me, Elliot. Not the wealth, not the inheritance, just me. He stepped closer, placing both hands on her shoulders, searching her face as if memorizing every line, every scar, every story written in the folds of her skin. You never needed that money to be rich, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. You've always been the wealthiest person I know. You gave me life, love, courage, everything that truly matters. And no amount of money could ever match that. Lucille's sobs were now gentle, almost peaceful, as she allowed herself to lean into him. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy, Elliot. To live a life filled with love, honesty, and dignity. I stayed silent because I feared losing you to the world's expectations. But now I see that love cannot be silenced. Love cannot be hidden. It must be spoken, shared, lived. Elliot wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if he would never let go. And for the first time in decades, Lucille felt the burden of years lift from her shoulders. The fear, the humiliation, the lonely nights, they all seemed to dissolve in the warmth of their embrace. Here, at last, was truth, untainted by greed or judgment. They stayed like that for a long while, two souls entwined in a quiet catharsis. Words were unnecessary. Their hearts spoke volumes. Elliot could feel the depth of her sacrifice, the unwavering strength hidden beneath her gentle exterior, and Lucille could feel the gratitude, love, and understanding radiating from the son she had never stopped watching over. Eventually, Lucille pulled back slightly, cupping his face in her hands. Elliot, we have a choice now. We can let this truth shape our lives for the better. We can rebuild, start anew, together. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes, a smile breaking through the storm of emotion. Yes, Mother. Together. No more lies. No more fear. Just us walking forward. And as they began the slow walk back toward the mansion, hand in hand, the sunlight fell upon them like a benediction. It was not wealth that would define their future, nor privilege, nor the approval of others. It was love, unshakable and real. A love that had endured secrecy, humiliation, and years of longing, now finally free to flourish. In that moment, Elliot understood something profound. The world could take everything from him, but it could never take his mother's love, nor the truth they had reclaimed. And for Lucille, the decades of quiet devotion, of sacrifice and resilience, were vindicated not by money or status, but by the undeniable power of a mother's heart and a son's unwavering love. They had emerged from the shadows together, stronger, united, and ready to face whatever the world might throw at them, fortified by the most enduring wealth of all, each other. Months passed since the revelation, and the world outside Lucille and Elliot's home had shifted, but inside, something even more profound was taking shape. The mansion, once a place of judgment and whispers, now hummed with life and purpose. Lucille had transformed her inheritance into something far more meaningful than gold or marble could ever be. She had built the Institute of Hope, a sanctuary for children whose bodies were fragile, but whose spirits longed to soar. The first time Lucille stepped into the Institute's sunlit therapy room, she felt a rush of gratitude so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. Wheelchairs lined the walls, therapy balls dotted the floor, and laughter echoed through open windows. The scent of fresh paint mixed with crayons and the gentle perfume of blooming flowers outside. Here she could see possibility, not limitation. Here a child's struggle was met with support, empathy, and unwavering belief. Marta, the mansion's cook and now her closest friend, worked alongside her. Her son, a bright-eyed boy of 7, moved carefully around the room, laughing at the small triumphs each day brought. Lucille's heart swelled as she watched them. A family once fractured by circumstance, now united by love and determination. Elliot had taken a leading role as well, organizing resources, speaking with donors, and ensuring that the Institute would provide both care and opportunity for every child who entered. He had grown into a man who understood the true meaning of wealth, not as currency, but as the ability to touch lives, to create hope, to make a difference. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the large windows, Lucille observed a small group of children playing. Their laughter was raw, unrestrained, and contagious. She saw her own struggles reflected in them, the quiet courage needed to face a world that often overlooked them, the resilience to keep moving forward despite obstacles. Her eyes softened, and she realized that every sacrifice she had made, every tear shed in solitude, had led to this moment of profound fulfillment. Elliot approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Mother," he said, his voice warm and steady, "look at what you've created. Look at the lives you're touching. This is real wealth." Lucille turned to him, her eyes glistening. "It's not just me," she replied. "It's all of us. Marta, you, the children, everyone who dares to hope and help. Love multiplied is the greatest legacy anyone can leave." As they walked through the Institute, they encountered Melanie, a humble and kind physiotherapist who volunteered with unwavering joy. Her presence added a gentle rhythm to the bustling environment, her laughter mingling with the children's, creating a symphony of warmth and belonging. Elliot and Melanie exchanged a glance, their bond blossoming quietly amid the work they shared. Lucille smiled softly, feeling the threads of connection, weaving a future full of compassion and love. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of rose and amber, Lucille sat in the garden of the Institute, Elliot by her side. They watched children run freely, their laughter ringing against the walls, the world outside forgotten for these precious moments of joy. Lucille felt an overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. "Mother," Elliot whispered, breaking the gentle silence, "you've given more than money or comfort. You've given life, dignity, and hope. I can never thank you enough." Lucille placed her hand over his, squeezing gently. "Elliot, seeing the world change because of what we've created together, that is thanks enough. Love is the only wealth worth having, and now it has room to grow." The Institute was not just a building or a collection of programs. It was a living testament to resilience, to courage, and to the power of one heart to change the lives of many. And as Lucille gazed at the children who now had the chance to thrive, she understood a truth she had always known in her soul. The richest person is not the one with gold, but the one who has the courage to give and to love without measure. Lucille's story ended not in solitude or fortune hoarded, but in legacy, an enduring testament that the power of love, empathy, and courage could outshine any material wealth. And in every smile, every laugh, every breakthrough she witnessed, she saw her life reflected back, not as a tale of hardship, but as a triumph of the human spirit. And now, dear viewer, if Lucille and Elliot's journey touched your heart, if you believe in the transformative power of love, courage, and hope, make sure to follow this channel. Every story here is crafted to inspire, uplift, and remind us that no matter the challenges we face, kindness and determination can change lives, and sometimes the world itself. Follow, subscribe, and continue walking this path of hope and inspiration with us.